Hello, and I am Caleb Jarreau, sports editor here at the Daily Beacon. And joining me today is Jackson Reyes with the Alligator down in Gainesville, Florida. And we will be doing some previewing of Tennessee's matchup with Florida. The Vols are looking for their first win in Gainesville since '03, first back-to-back wins since '03-'04. So there's a lot of history riding on this matchup. Jackson, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what y'all are working on down there at the Alligator.
Hi, my name is Jackson Reyes. As you mentioned, I'm the sports editor over at the Alligator. So, right now, just getting football coverage going, volleyball, soccer. And again, thank you for having me on. Really excited to preview this matchup.
Yeah, for sure. Let's dive right in with probably the most obvious question and the question you probably answered 100 times. Who is Graham Mertz? What did he look like? I'm sure everybody saw him against Utah, and it obviously wasn't, a Heisman performance. But what do you think Graham Mertz is capable of, and what are you expecting from him on Saturday?
Yeah, so Graham Mertz, he spent 4 years over at Wisconsin. He started a lot of games there, but ultimately, his career kind of, he was benched, eventually lost the job, and then transferred down to Florida. And then so far through two games, he hasn't looked, I won't say he looked the best, and he hasn't looked bad, though. Against Utah, he ended up having to throw the ball a lot because Florida was losing for almost all of that game. Ended up throwing 44 passes, but he completed 71% of those passes, threw over 300 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And even with that interception, I feel like if you watch it, there's only so much you could blame him for it. He throws a ball to Ricky Pearsall. The ball's a little high, but then Pearsall tries to go up and make the catch, and he kind of like volleyball spikes it up in the air, and then a Utah corner just catches the ball as it comes back down. And then against McNeese State, there were a couple times they were trying to get the deep ball going, but McNeese State was playing good coverage. And so I don't know if that's on the wide receivers or just Billy Napier's play calling, but eventually finally found Ricky Pearsall for a 50-yard bomb for a touchdown. And I think he ended that game like 14 of 17, just under 200 yards and a touchdown. So, I feel like he hasn't been able to flash too much just in terms of, what he's capable as a quarterback. But the things he has been able to show is, he's an accurate quarterback. When he needs to throw a deep, he does have a little bit of arm strength to get it the deep ball. Obviously not the same as Anthony Richardson from last season, but it is there. But I'd say some of his struggles, some of his flaws is just, the offensive line is not great, but he does have a tendency to hold on the ball a little too long, and that has led to him getting pressured a few times. And just the other thing is, maybe he's not necessarily leading wide receivers to the right places with his balls, but for the most part, through two games, I think he's looked pretty good. But Tennessee is going to be a real test to just how good of a quarterback he can be at Florida.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on it a little bit. We saw him throw the ball a ton against Utah, and then McNeese State goes to Gainesville, and it kind of turned into just a run fest. Game 3, what would you say the identity of this Florida team is? Are they going to be establish the run and then pass whenever it's third and long or when they feel like they have something, or is it going to be a rely on Graham Mertz all night?
I mean, honestly, it depends on how the game starts. Um, they Billy Napier, he wants to be a run first team. He wants to establish that run game. I think even though they did try and get some deep balls against McNeese State and it didn't really work out, I think he was perfectly fine just running it down their throat and getting like 10 yards every carry. And obviously that won't be the same against Tennessee. An SEC defense is not going to be giving up those kind of numbers. They're not going to give up over 300 rushing yards in a game. But these are two talented running backs, Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne. So, they still have the ability to, put up numbers against an SEC defense. So I think the goal is trying to establish that run game and then looking to Graham Mertz and those receivers as sort of a secondary in the game.
Yeah, and Tennessee's defensive front is much improved this season. Obviously, second in tackles for loss and first in sacks. It feels like they're in the backfield almost every play. You talked about that offensive line struggling and wanting to establish the run game. Which way do you see that battle swinging on Saturday? Do you think the offensive line will be successful and be successful enough for Graham Mertz to throw the ball and establish the run? Or will it be just, Tennessee pinning their ears back and sitting in the backfield every play?
Yeah, that one depends. A lot of it depends on two players for me. The first one is Kingsley Egakwan. He started every game at center last season for the Gators. He's a talented offensive lineman. He's missed the first 2 games, and that's where you saw a lot of times where they were starting a redshirt sophomore Jake Slaughter for the first time, and he didn't look great against a Pac-12 front, a very talented Pac-12 team. But having Kingsley back is going to do a lot to improve that line. So I think if he's back and if he's 100%, that'll help a lot. And looking at the right side of that offensive line, I know the first 2 games they've been playing Damian George. He's the transfer from Alabama, and he has not looked great. He has definitely been sort of a weak side of that offensive line. There was a play against Utah where they ran like it was a 4th-and-1 play. There was a shovel pass to the tight end, and he was supposed to like slide and block for him, but instead he slid like to the right or the left, even though the play was going to the right, and he ended up blocking his own offensive lineman. So I don't know if it's just inexperience or if he's not very quick because he's just so big, but that right side is going to be a major issue. So I think trying to improve on that side, because I look at the other side and I look at a guy like Austin Barber, and I think that line has been shared up. But I look at the center and I look at the right side of the offensive line, and if they can't make the improvements that they need to make, then it might be a long night for Graham Mertz in the backfield.
Yeah, Tennessee's had their own issues on offensive line, and center Cooper Mays, his status is still questionable for Saturday. But I can at least safely say I have not seen a Tennessee offensive lineman block another offensive lineman. So at least they have that going for them. And Jackson, I want to swing over to the defensive side. Joe Milton has shown some accuracy issues. Wide receivers have shown some issues catching the ball. Obviously, Joe Milton started the Austin Peay game, I think 1 for 11 with 11 yards, and his one throw was to a running back, and they didn't have a wide receiver catch a pass until right before halftime. So the offense has shown question marks that we did not see last year with Hendon Hooker, with Cedric Tillman, with Jalen Hyatt. On Florida's defense, what is their effectiveness? I know Utah started their second string and third string quarterback both got run against Florida and found success. What does that Gator defense hold? What are their strengths? What are weaknesses? Who are some guys that Tennessee fans will probably hear their names called on Saturday night?
Yeah, so looking at that Florida defense, I'll start with that defensive line. I think obviously the name to point out is Princey Uman-Mielen, edge rusher. He's a very talented player. He's got super long arms. He's really talented at just getting after the quarterback and just putting that pressure on him. And so I think he's a guy who can get after Joe Milton and really apply that pressure and try and force those accuracy issues that he has. If he has a guy in his face, those are only going to get worse. So I think he's a guy definitely to look out for. Looking at the rest of the defensive line, they got a couple transfers. Cam Jackson has been really solid, especially on run defense. Desmond Watson, Big Des, like 430 pounds. He's always a factor. Then looking at linebacker, Scooby Williams, he got his first career sack against McNeese State the other day. He's a guy who's finally starting to see some playing time, and I think he's made some improvements. So he's a name to look out for. And kind of just looking at this defensive line as a whole, against Utah and McNeese State, they've been really good at stopping the run game. And obviously that's so important in the SEC to be able to defend the run. And also looking at that secondary, it's a very young secondary. They recently had, last week, their only senior in the secondary room announced he'd be leaving the team and entering the transfer portal. So the team does not have a true senior on the team. And yet, they still look good. And obviously, that those, inexperience could show against an SEC offense. Especially since, again, they've only played Utah and then an FCS school. But I think they've shown that they can, hold their own out there. And especially since, you look at the Utah game, they gave up that big play on the first play of the game for Utah. And then they gave up a pretty long run to the third string quarterback, who they're using more as a run first QB. But other than that, they really controlled Utah. They only allowed them to convert 3 of their 13 third downs, which was an area that they really struggled in last season, trying to stop teams on third down. So I think we're seeing a defense that, even though they're young, if you're talented, you may not necessarily need the experience, but, we'll see once SEC play comes around this Saturday.
Yeah, and specifically, what does Florida's run defense hold for Tennessee? Because with Joe Milton's inaccuracies and the wide receivers struggling and just the offense being out of sync passing game wise, we've seen Tennessee's three-headed monster of Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, and Dylan Sampson averaged 6.1 yards a carry. And Dylan Sampson opened the season with 4 total touchdowns, 3 on the ground, 1 through the air. I mean, we've just seen that running back room really respond to the call of, hey, we can't pass the ball effectively. We really need y'all to, backpack the team to a win. And we've seen them do it 2 weeks in a row and be very, very successful on the ground. I don't think anybody with Josh Heupel as head coach expected to hear that the running backs and the rushing yards are higher than the passing yards. So we've seen that through the first 2 weeks for Tennessee. Do you think they'll be effective on the ground against Florida? And how do you think Florida's defensive front will hold?
Yeah, I mean, obviously SEC offense, SEC running backs. I think you always have a chance to succeed, and I do think Tennessee does have that opportunity to try and get something going in the run game. But I do think that this Florida run defense has been, obviously a little underrated just because they were so bad last season, and then they've made such huge strides under the new defensive coordinator, Austin Armstrong. And so I do think that Tennessee may have a little bit of a struggle to get the run game going, especially if, Joe Milton's struggling, if he, if receivers are dropping passes, if he's missing guys and they have to rely on the run game and become a little bit more one-dimensional, then I think that might make it a little tougher for the run game. Especially, you look at guys who, guys I didn't mention, like Jamari Lyons, who's looked really good so far. Shamar James, the linebacker, he's looked great so far. He's flying all over the field, making tackles, getting tackles for loss. And I think the number one thing for this Florida defense is in terms of pass rush, they get pressure on the quarterback, but they're not necessarily getting to him for sacks. They didn't have any sacks against Utah. They only had 2 against McNeese, but they're getting to the backfield a lot on these run plays for tackles for losses in both games. Jamari Lyons, they got to McNeese State for a safety last game. And of course, it's an FCS opponent, but, it's still impressive that, getting a safety, it's no easy task. So I think if Florida's run defense, if the defense as a whole can slow down Melton and force them into the run game, then I think they can have success.
And then Tennessee against Austin Peay and Virginia to an extent, and Clemson in the Orange Bowl, if you want to go all the way back there, have seen defenses play really, really soft coverage on these wide receivers. Basically saying, hey, we'll give you the 10-yard, 5-yard pass if Joe Milton can complete it, but we're not going to give you over the top. We've seen Joe Milton struggle a little bit with those short passes. We've seen the wide receivers struggle a little bit. What do you think Florida's defensive scheme or, I guess, plan going into the game is? And then how do you think the secondary, which I'm pretty sure you've mentioned was a pretty young secondary, and they lost their one senior to the transfer portal after the first game of the season, which is kind of crazy. But what do you think that young secondary will be able to do against Tennessee? And what do you think the defensive game plan will be drawn up to be?
Yeah, looking at that secondary, I think the one guy who I think will have a good game for sure, which now that I say it, probably jinxed him, but Jason Marshall Jr., he is a junior, so he does have that experience starting games. And he's their cornerback one. I think he'll have a good game, especially with, a Tennessee skill group that, has shown flashes and shown that they can be good, but through the first 2 games of the season have struggled. I think he can take advantage of that. But then I look at sort of the younger players, especially that safety room where, their one safety's a freshman, the other safety's a sophomore. Sorry. And I look at those two, and it was the safeties who kind of had a miscommunication when they gave up the 70-yard bomb to Utah in the game 1. And so I think it's sort of, again, like you mentioned, giving that soft coverage and allowing the short stuff and trying not to give up, a giant deep ball that can really mess up, your game plan or mess up your confidence as a young team. But I think it just comes down to communication with the young guys. With guys like Jakeem Jackson, who's a freshman corner, Jordan Castell, he's the freshman starting safety, Miguel Mitchell, he's the sophomore safety. These guys are talented, and I think that they have what it takes to, stop Joe Milton and stop these Tennessee skill players. But it just comes down to, can you as a group, communicate and be cohesive so you don't have a mental error? Because, my biggest concern is, as freshmen and as sophomores, it's possible that you play a great game all game long, but it could come down to just a couple mental errors that allows Joe Milton to have space for a 50-yard touchdown pass. And honestly, you look at the Utah game, it comes down to just a couple plays like that where if you don't have those mental errors, you're right there in the ball game. But you shoot yourself in the foot with those kind of errors, and I could see the same thing happening against Tennessee.
Yeah, and now, Jackson, I kind of want to pivot to more overarching themes. I kind of joked about it a second ago, but having your senior defensive back or your veteran defensive back enter the transfer portal 2 weeks into the season, not even, is not a very good look for the state of Billy Napier's program. How would you say the culture at Florida is? What has kind of been the theme, or I guess the feeling around the media and the team just about the future of Billy Napier and where Florida's going?
Yeah, I'd say as a whole, even though again that guy transferring was not the best look, especially one of the only seniors on the team. But I'd say as a whole, just culture wise, I think we're seeing sort of a shift, and I feel like that's become so much of a buzzword in college football. Culture and things like that, and obviously, I'm at the press conferences and things like that, but they only allow you to see so much behind the scenes. But I feel like, especially with the guys he's brought in, the assistant coaches, like Austin Armstrong, who's a younger guy, like Court Raymond, who's the secondary coach, they've really been able to buy in. And I think that him giving all these young guys so much experience, like now, has really been able to help establish like his program, like what he wants to do as a head coach. And I think that is just making waves in terms of, what you're seeing him do as a recruiter. Obviously, now you need to see the results on the field because, a head coach is not just as a recruiter, even though that's so important in college football. It's also, what you do on a game day. So I'd say, obviously, like the transfer is not a great look from the outside looking in, but I think things are sort of trending in the right direction. I think the biggest thing is, obviously you don't want to give them so much patience where it's okay where every single year you're going like 6-6, 7-5. But I think Florida fans just need to be a little patient in terms of just, you know, let him establish the things he wants to do. Obviously some of these freshmen and sophomores have shown flashes, but you really do need to let them grow and get more seasons under their belt.
Yeah, and I feel like Coach Prime over at Colorado has kind of made it terrible for every new head coach now because in his year one, he's taken a horrible team from last season and gone 2-0 and probably 3-0 after this weekend. So Billy Napier, from the outside looking in, I'd say everybody thinks the patience is running thin at Florida, but the way you put it, hopefully the culture is turning around for his program. What do you think? You talked about making recruiting transfer to the field and the on-field results. What do you think Florida's season outlook is this year? What do you think they'll finish? Where do you think they'll finish in the East? Everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, looking at honestly, I feel like this is a little bit of a cop out answer, but a lot of it comes down to this Tennessee game right here. Kind of sets the tone for the rest of the season because Tennessee is favored. They're probably the better team on paper, but you're in the swamp. Tennessee is historically struggled there. Florida still has some talent, especially in like areas like the running back room, defensive line. Um, and if Florida's able to come out with this win against a top 15 opponent, then that sets the tone for this year. And I think if they win this game, they have the chance to go 8-4, finish like probably third in the East. Go like 5-3. If they lose the game, then I think they go like 6-6, 7-5. I think no matter what, win or lose this game, they're still gonna make a bowl. I think they're just too talented to not find 5 more wins, even if they lose to Tennessee. Uh, but if they do beat Tennessee, then I think that's going to help them, gain so much more so much more momentum and confidence going forward. But I'd say 6-6 or 7-5 is probably the realistic finish for this team.
Yeah, I feel like a 6-6 Florida team will have everybody calling for Billy Napier's head on Twitter before long. So we'll see how that goes. And Jackson, I think my score prediction, I think it was 30-21 or 27-21 with Tennessee coming out. I think the defensive front and honestly the offense will just frankly, out athlete Florida at some point, just get their playmakers into space and let them make plays. What do you see happening on Saturday night when Tennessee walks into the swamp looking for their first win since 2003?
Yeah, I look at this game and I look at a lot of factors. Again, I look at it being in the swamp. Last season's game was very close, and it was in Knoxville. And then Tennessee comes down to Gainesville. Joe Milton's had some struggles, and so I think Florida's gonna play really well, and they're gonna keep it really close. But I think it's gonna come down to, can the secondary keep it together for a full 60 minutes, and can special teams, because they've especially struggled with their field goal kickers, keep it together. I think ultimately, Tennessee comes away with the win, but I think it's very close. I'll say 27-24 Tennessee. My score prediction.
All right.
I think it's very close.
I'll hit you with one more here, Jackson. Do you think, offensive-wise, which team and run or pass do you think will perform better? Because I've spent a lot of time just staring at the wall, trying to think if Joe Milton can pass for more yards than Jalen Wright, Jabari Smollett, Dylan Sampson can run for against this team. So I'll throw the question at you, Jackson. Where do you think, which offense do you think will have the best day? And then will it be on the ground or through the air?
I think, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting answer. I feel so. I think as a game, Florida's run game will probably have the best game. I just think Trevor Etienne and Montrell Johnson are so talented. But I think in terms of just if you only look at the box score, I feel like Joe Milton could have the best game, because I think maybe he'll struggle. Maybe he'll try a lot of short passes. Maybe they're not hitting, or maybe the receivers are dropping the ball. But I think he's going to have some opportunities where he's going to have receivers open deep. And so he'll get a few chunk plays, or maybe he'll have a 70-yard bomb similar to the Utah game where Florida gave up, that, will really boost his stats, and also it's just going to help them win the game. So I'd say that's my answer.
Yeah, I would have to say I agree, but for a different answer. So after Joe against Austin Peay started 1-11 for the 11 yards or whatever it was, I think he completed, I want to say 10 or 11 passes straight, and probably 8 or 9 of those were just screen passes. So I feel like his passer rating will just be through the roof from screen passes if he doesn't get those chunk plays. But like you said, I still think the chunk plays are there. It's just a matter of the offense being in sync, which from what it sounds like inside the program, they had a meeting. It wasn't as bad as a come to Jesus meeting sounds, but it was just, hey, we have to kind of wake up, get this offense in sync and get rolling. So Jackson, I'm looking forward to Saturday night. Why don't you go ahead and plug everything y'all are doing at the Alligator and where people can find you?
All right. Again, I'm Jackson Reyes. You can check out all my work on Twitter. It's just my name, Jackson Reyes, just no O in the Jackson. And then you obviously check out all of our work over at Alligator Sports, the Alligator. Florida volleyball is ranked third in the country. They just beat FSU last night. They welcome number 1 Wisconsin to Gainesville on Sunday. So the day after the game, or day after the Tennessee-Florida matchup, we'll have a top 3 matchup in the Stephen C. O'Connell Center. And then Florida soccer, they recently lost their first match of the season, but they're off to their best start in I want to say 4 years. So very exciting sports coverage going on, along with football. So very exciting stuff. But again, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. Top 3 volleyball matchup. I cannot complain. Tennessee went to Madison, and I think they lost in 5 sets or 4 sets. So took it down to the wire, but couldn't pull it out. And Jackson, I will see you on Saturday. So for Jackson Reyes, I'm Caleb Jarreau, and this is a production of the Daily Beacon Sports Podcasts.